thank you for coming along today. There's a few little bits of housekeeping, primarily for those of you that are in the room, but there's a couple of things that those of you who are joining us online will also benefit from knowing. For those of you that are here, things like toilets are just on this main corridor here. So male toilets are at that end and females are just further down. Fire exits, if you just head back out to where the registration desk is, you can go down either the staircase on the left or the right, and that'll take you just out to the front of the main building. In terms of the programme for today, we have 4 keynote speakers who will be joining us to discuss digital assessment. And we've also got a few lightning talks that will be taking place with coffee breaks and a lunch break intertwined in between. We do have quite a long coffee breaks, but that's just because it's been a wee while since maybe people have met in face-to-face, and so it is a nice chance to get to know each other and have a chat without just standing and listening to everybody talking all day. In terms of the sessions and how we will host questions, we do have Slido set up, so just the hashtag there. If you just go to slido.com, enter that code, and you'll be able to post a question there if you want to. Now that can be done in person and online. Alternatively, in person, just raise your hand and we'll come to you with the questions. And similarly, for those of you online, you can raise your hand as well. It's worth bearing in mind that we are recording this event, so if you would prefer for your question to be asked over Slido for anonymity for any reason, then that's absolutely fine. Alternatively, you'll be on the recording asking your question if not. So the first session that we're going to, or the first talk that we've got today, is from our ODL team, so our online distance learning team. But just to give you a little bit of motivation for the workshop, we received funding for this workshop back in 2019, with plans to host it in the summer of 2020. Back then, our ODL programme was relatively niche in terms of a way of delivering online learning. We were the only university in Scotland to offer an MSc in data analytics online, but we all know what happened within the next 6 months of us receiving that funding. And so what was initially quite a niche topic is now something that we are all a lot more experienced in. And so actually the topic of today is a lot more applicable to everybody here. So the talk that we're going to start with won't focus specifically on digital assessment, but will more give you an overview of our ODL programme, how they run the programme, a bit about their assessments, and then we'll hand over to our keynote speakers and our lightning talks that will have more of a focus specifically on the assessment side of things for digital learning. So that's all from me. And I'll hand over now to our ODL team of Craig, Colette and Ailey, who will give us an overview of their programme.
Yeah, so thank you, Marnie. So I'm just basically going to carry on where Marnie left off. So this is really about our ODL programme that we run in the School of Maths and Stats at the University of Glasgow. So I'm just going to give you a very brief overview of that programme, how it works. Ailey will then talk about the assessment structure and some of the learning technologies that we use. And then Craig will probably have the most exciting part, where he'll talk more about the new digital accessibility tools that we have that were developed along with David, who's sitting at the back there. So he's the expert along with Craig. Yeah, so this is really centred around the MSc in data analytics. So this was developed in 2017 as part of the university's blended and online learning initiative. So at present, we have 137 students registered for this programme, but because it is a part-time programme and it's run online distance learning, there are many different ways that people can actually complete the full programme. So we highly recommend that students take 3 years. So this basically equates to 60 credits per year or 2 top courses per semester. And then the MSc project is taken over 1 academic session. But in actual fact, some students do complete over 2 years, which is a really big commitment. But they do kind of have up to 6 years to complete the programme. So we do have a very small but significant number of students who take more than 3 years to complete the full programme. So in 2020, in collaboration with the Office of National Statistics, we developed the data analytics for government programme. So this is extremely similar to our MSc in data analytics, but it was designed specifically for employees of UK public sector bodies. So the main differences are 2 taught courses, but other than that, they're very similar in structure and also very similar in content, but just several things are kind of more targeted towards these people. So at the moment, we have 14 students who are registered to this programme. So there are obviously a lot less students on this programme in comparison to the data analytics programme. And then more recently in September 2021, so this academic session, we decided to allow UK public sector body employees to take courses from the MDataGov or the Data Analytics for Government programme as individual courses. So they have the option to take these as student learners where they take assessment, or they have the option to take these as non-student learners where they don't take assessments, but they're just really involved with that kind of learning process. So throughout this academic session, we've got 15 people who registered for at least one course as a student learner and 56 people who registered for at least one course as a non-student learner. So you can see here there's definitely a shift towards people interested in the learning process, but not necessarily in taking the assessment. So with all this in mind, I think this programme in particular, it really targets a very specific audience. So in particular, I think for the most part, most of these students already work in a data-driven role to some degree, and they tend to just want that qualification which says, well, as you have these knowledge and skills, along with their kind of professional experience. And of course, as you might expect, because it is an online distance learning programme, we do have this kind of global community of learners, as you can see here on the map. So based on what you can see here, around 50% of our students are UK based, but we do tend to have people kind of scattered all over the place. So I guess that's kind of what you might expect, as I say, from an online distance learning programme. But although there are these kind of geographical differences, there's definitely some similarities between the types of students that we have on this programme. So they are what you might call mature students, where they're kind of in their mid-20s all the way up to their 50s and beyond. Sorry, that's my phone. And as I say, more often than not, they do have that professional experience. So they either work full-time, which is more often than not, or they can work part-time. And although this programme doesn't necessarily ask for a qualification in statistics or programming, we do find that they do have that kind of more applied experience through their employment, really. And in addition to that, more often than not, they do have a life outside academia. They have caring responsibilities, they have families, they have jobs, so they're not solely focused on their academic performance. But having said that, at the same time, they're probably the most highly focused people I've ever met in my entire life, and they're so super motivated to learn. And I think that's why when we talk about assessment and learning technologies, we really have to kind of understand who it is we're trying to teach to. So with all that in mind, this leads us on to the kind of assessment structures that we do use and the learning technologies. So I'll pass you on to Ailey. Thank you.
So we're not going to focus a lot on the assessment, but I thought I would give you all a brief run through of the types of assessment that we use. So generally we try to have our courses assessed via continuous assessment. So we tend to have lots of assessment that's quite low credit bearing. So we don't have just one piece of assessment that's worth 100% of the grade, for example. Because we know our students work full time, they can have very, very busy periods at work. So we think it's nicer to have those sort of low stake assessments throughout the course. It also encourages them to keep up with the courses and not just completely focus on like an exam at the end. So the types of assessment we tend to run for our programming courses, we have obviously programming assignments and app development. I can speak probably for Craig, who teaches our programming. Some of the stuff that they develop in these courses is amazing, like way better than what I would be able to do, because a lot of them already work in programming roles, so they're very, very experienced in that. We have sort of typical data analysis reports for some of the more data-driven courses. We have oral assessments where students are asked to prepare for a mini viva on a certain topic for that course, and they'll meet with the course lecturer and they'll be asked questions on that topic. That's quite intensive in terms of time, of course. So it's trying to find that balance between assessing the students well, but also we're very overrun with students in our department, so it's hard to find that balance sometimes. We also have some content production, so they'll be asked to produce a presentation on a topic that's not covered in the course, and the other students will watch that topic and they'll be almost peer assessed on how well they've presented. And we have peer assessment actually that runs through quite a few of our courses. Because we have a lot of continuous assessment and a lot of students, the marking burden is very high. Peer assessment is a way of trying to keep that lower. And we've got a few people today who are actually going to speak specifically on peer assessment. We've also tried to introduce some group projects. These are very good and they're very well received, but they're slightly difficult to arrange because students live all over the world. You can't just randomly assign groups. You have to take into account some people are 10 hours ahead or 10 hours behind and try and put them into groups based on that. Otherwise, they can't actually get together and discuss things. And then for some of our courses, we feel as though the more traditional exam/class test style still works better. So maybe for some of the more fundamental courses, so probability, for example. When the course began in 2017, we did actually run exams and students were expected to either come to Glasgow or London or take an exam in a UK embassy in their country. However, because of COVID, that all changed. We were forced to have them online, and we actually felt as though that worked quite well. So we've kept them online. We only had this for a few courses because it's difficult to get students to commit to being available at a certain time on a certain day, but we are quite flexible within that day. So we'll run a couple of different sittings of each of the class tests to make sure, and we'll have multiple starting times to make sure we are as flexible as possible. I think the main thing with assessment is being as flexible as we possibly can. So we give quite long times from a project being given out to when it's due to be submitted, because we are aware of all the other commitments that our students have. But generally, I would say, as Colette mentioned, our students are very highly motivated. They tend to put in a lot of work on their assessments and generally do very well because of that. So just moving on to some of the learning technology that we use, I would say probably our fanciest or snazziest thing is what we call our lightboard. There's a picture of the lightboard here. So we basically have a filming studio that was created by Ludger, who's no longer with us, but he develops the whole programme. And I think he actually went to B&Q and bought all the wood and built it all himself, which is amazing. So essentially what the whiteboard lets us do is be face to camera while we're writing. It's quite hard to explain, so I'm going to show you a small video that's actually filmed by the media team. It's a little bit cringy, but it gives a good idea of how it works. And you can see what it looks like when we're filming and then what the final video will look like. And I'm not putting the sound on because that's even worse. So we write on the glass, which is then filmed. We're standing behind the glass, so it's backwards when you're filming it. And then we use Final Cut to edit them all, and we have a software that sort of flips the writing so that you can see what we're doing, and that's just Craig showing the whacking tutorials that we also do. And I'm going to stop that there because it's not good.
I guess you look very ambidextrous because in the flick thing you're sort of left-handed and you're right-handed.
No, so we write as normal, yeah, but it's just flipped. So all of our students are like, wow, you can write backwards and left-handed. And I'm like, I can barely write forwards and right-handed. So it looks, but I think it's strange when you watch yourself because your whole body is flipped. So you're used to seeing yourself the other way. It's a little bit strange, but I think they work well, and the students, they really like them. We've had really good feedback from them. And it's nicer than just the general slides with a little face, I think, in the corner. So that's all of our lecture style videos, which are embedded within our notes, are filmed in that way. We also have the Khan Academy style tutorials. So rather than just have printed solutions, we think it's nice to have someone actually speak through the solutions. So all of our tasks within the notes will also have an accompanying video for that. We also offer one-to-one sessions in Zoom, so they're almost like office hours. Students can book them if they want extra help. And they're actually quite well attended, I would say, in comparison to on-campus office hours. Not everyone uses them, but some students definitely find them really helpful. We also run weekly live sessions for every course. These are not compulsory because it's impossible to find a time that suits all of our students. Usually what we do is we have a vote and we just go with the most popular time. It's difficult to find something that's going to suit everybody, but we do record these so people who can't attend live can watch the recording, and these are usually either Q&A sessions or we'll go through some of the tasks as a group, almost like you would in a tutorial. And now I think I'll pass you over to Craig, who will continue on with the learning technology.
Thanks, Ailey. So as Ailey mentioned, I'm now just going to briefly talk about some developments in learning technology we've looked at in the past few years, particularly with Dave, who's sat in the corner, but I'll do my best to present his work. So anything quite technical you can direct to him. So most of our materials on the courses are delivered in an asynchronous format, and this is kind of usually presented in PDF content. So we'll present a series of PDF notes, and in these there'll be a series of tasks along with the videos which Ailey was just showing you previously, and several examples for them to work through. This was created using R Markdown typically, and we have our own kind of bespoke template for the ODL branding, like you can see here with the front cover. This was developed by Ludger. The issue with these PDF notes is they are only PDF based, as you can see, and they were quite lacking in accessible features. So this is something that we've wanted to develop on and improve the digital accessibility of our materials, which is what we've been looking at now. So this has been developed by Dave, as I mentioned just there. So we've kind of worked through this, looking to create a more accessible version of our course materials. And our main motivation is really to kind of create accessible notes that don't just pass basic accessibility tests, but they're actually catered for a variety of different physical and cognitive disabilities. And also another motivation is not just to cater for these disabilities, but also to provide accessibility features which can be useful for everyone. So for example, reading your notes on a mobile device, say if your laptop's broken or it's not accessible and you're on the go, and sometimes scaling with PDFs, and this can be a bit of a nightmare and involve a lot of zooming and scrolling across. I'm sure you've all had this issue at some point. Using dark mode, particularly if you've got a headache or if you're like me, don't like working in bright lights usually, this can be quite handy as well. And this is just some of the different kind of features we've tried to incorporate. So the general approach we try to take when developing our accessible tools is trying to be a bit holistic about it. And we want to build in accessibility right from the start with what we create. And we want to create features, as I just said previously, that are useful for everyone, and they're quite thoughtful as well. And we really want to concentrate on keeping everything as simple and neat as possible, and not just passing basic accessibility tests. So how we've tried to do this is to create an HTML-based version of our notes, which we can then produce a PDF version as well, which has more accessible features. So the main motivation for using HTML for delivering our notes is the wide variety of accessibility tools that you can easily incorporate into designing these. HTML itself is responsive, and this can adapt to different screen types, dealing with what I was saying with using multiple devices previously. Also allows us to include some richer experiences in our notes, such as interactivity and animation, which I'll touch on towards the end. And from this, we can create then a more accessible PDF version. So some students still prefer to have a kind of hard copy and a PDF copy of their notes, which they can save and perhaps read off as well, which contains a bit more of these accessible features that we mentioned. So this HTML file, which has been created, it's self-contained, and it's got a very simple and distraction-free design, which I'll show you in a couple of minutes. This comes with a sidebar with some contents which allow for easy navigation. So this saves a lot of mindless scrolling like you would have in a PDF, which can be quite distracting and difficult for certain learners. We also have a set of viewing options, which I'll demonstrate shortly. So we can change colour scheme, we can change the spacing and sizing of texts and the page content. We've also now moved the solutions for tasks right next to one another. So when you're on the task, you can then press a button and the solution appears. Again, this removes the need for kind of scrolling down to the bottom of documents where solutions tend to be kept. We also use SVG graphics, and the reason for this again is with this kind of scalability in different devices, it ensures the image remains in focus and it's crisp even when you zoom in, as opposed to kind of more standard PNGs, which will just not really scale well and can get quite fuzzy. So I'll just give you a brief demonstration of these notes now. Please ignore my face in the background. So this is just an example of our notes from the R programming course, week 6, which looks at ggplot. So this is a general layout here. As you can see, this is quite a more simplistic base design. There's nothing very distracting about it, quite light and easy to read. I'll try and find an example to show you. So here we have a task, for example. So we have a task here, and we want to ask them to create a scatter plot. We can press the show answer here, which then provides the code and the relevant output graphics. Again, making this simple. As you can see, we have here on the right our contents. We also have different options, so we can change the colour theme. So we can go with yellow and black for our text, say black on blue. We have dark mode too. So there are a few different options that are built here. We can also increase our font size, making this larger. We can also increase the spacing between different layers, so different lines of paragraphs as well. Can also increase the spacing between lettering, making this easier to read, and of course the width of the lines, making this wider too. So all in all, we've incorporated a few different features here, which provide more accessible options than the traditional PDF, which we have. And one other cool thing which Dave has developed is accessible LaTeX. I will try my best to explain this well in a quick fashion because I realise time is not on my side. But if you do want more detail on this, I'll be happy to talk about it further with you. One big issue, is particularly in mathematical sciences, is LaTeX for accessibility. When you're using LaTeX to create things such as equations, linking this to text-to-speech readers doesn't really work using traditional tech and can be a bit difficult. Dave has come up with a nice solution which can do this in the following steps. So we can take a LaTeX command and convert this into MathML, which is an XML specification for writing out mathematical equations. You can then convert that MathML equation into speech using a speech rule engine. So it takes that input and actually turns into the verbal words it is. So for example, like a linear equation, this would read as y equals x beta and would actually read out the lettering in words. And then would have this as a string of speech. You can then convert that MathML into an SVG image, and then the title of this image you can set to that speech string and then connect that into an assistive technology for speech, which will then read out that speech letter, actually reading the equation out loud. So this is quite a cool feature, I feel, and something that's quite nice to add, particularly for a lot of courses with maths. It'd be quite interesting to see that in a pure maths course, for example. I don't know how well it'll work, but it'd be good to test it. And just to finish off, so this is what we've developed so far, but we are looking at some extensions, and I touched on this briefly. Kind of increasing the interactivity within our notes is something we really want to look into. So things such as embedding in quizzes, which would be nice as kind of checkpoints for students to just kind of assess their knowledge over a previous section. They can do this quickly with, say, a multiple choice quiz, and then assess how they've done looking through the material. And this is something we want to add into our notes. And we can also look at things such as plots, so modifications of plots, so how we can change things in distributions, for example, and the students can look at this embedded in the notes. We also would like to include some animations as well. So particularly plots evolving over time is something that doesn't lend itself nicely to a PDF traditionally, but something with more animation can actually show these illustrations quite nicely, and also kind of visualizing more complex statistical problems as well. So that is everything from myself, Colette and Ailey. So thank you very much for listening, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you have, and of course talk to you throughout the day from any of your experiences, particularly now that I think everyone has had a taste of learning online. Of course, as we spoke earlier, you can leave a comment or a question on the Slido as well, and we'll try and pick that up. But if there's any other follow-on questions you have, do feel free to email us at our very long management mailbox email, mathstacksanalyticsmscmanagement@glasgow.ac.uk. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening.
5 minutes quick, so I don't know if you want to take
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a question on Slido that says your LaTeX to speech strategy is interesting, but what are the advantages, disadvantages of your strategy compared with MathJack's?
Dave? Yeah. I'll take this over to you.
This one?
Maybe not working.
There you go.
So my strategy actually does use MathJack's, but I pre-compile it at the compile stage. So the HTML file can be completely self-contained, and it's just the text string which ends up in the HTML file. The disadvantage would be there is a limit with this, with a very long excerpt of algebra, and the string is going to be very long and probably quite hard to understand. Oh, I actually just typed it.
Okay.
All right, okay, you typed it in. So David?
Okay, so our next question on Slido is, what have you been using to create HTML and PDF notes? I've been using, is it Chiron or Chiron, from the Newcastle Mass e-learning group, which takes in as LaTeX or Markdown. I think our approach is similar, but we'll pass back to Dave.
So I've custom made a JavaScript compiler, which is based, it uses Knitter, and it's based quite a lot on R Markdown. But I've made this in JavaScript to have a very customized, accessible HTML front end.
There was some hand up, I think it's gone from Zoom.
Yeah, it's gone if you've been participants.
If someone did have their hand up on Zoom, please feel free to put your hand back up.
So my question is about the flexible online class tests. I'm just wondering if you can comment on academic integrity issues around those.
Do you want me to answer this one? So I guess the integrity part, this is quite a difficult one. So Alien Flight within their class have class tests. We typically offer our class tests within 2 sittings within a day, in a morning and evening slot, just to kind of cater for the differences in time zones. In terms of the integrity front, we do accept that the exam is naturally open book as it is online. And I think this is catered within a lot of our examinations. We try and kind of, especially, I don't want to speak in your behalf, Claire, so I might pass over to you.
No, I was just going to say, so Ellie and I do a class test for probability. It's set up as a Moodle quiz. So within that, you do have that ability to kind of randomise questions at the same time. So we have questions that are kind of numeric, multiple choice, but can be randomised. But we also have kind of upload questions, which can be randomised at some point where you can change the numbers, but they can upload different answers. So they're not set up the way that you would with a typical exam where you just have a PDF and they would upload their solutions. There is some ways we can, but obviously we can't mitigate those circumstances under all possible ways, but that's kind of how we work around it. I don't know if Ailey's anything to add to that.
I think that's about it.
Yeah.
It's difficult to completely eradicate it, but I do feel like those ODL students, they're so motivated to learn. They don't want to cheat just to do well. They actually want to learn. So
yeah, and as Craig had said, the morning paper is different to the afternoon paper, and because everyone, they're basically all over the world, they're generally not sitting together. Geographically, they can't work together. I mean, I don't know if it's just me being naive, but we do feel that they generally just want to do the exam, then they're going off to work that day. So it's maybe not quite the same under other circumstances, but again, that's just my impression.
Okay, so we have another question on how many hours of recording/editing work per hour of finalised whiteboard video. This is a good question and a very funny question. I think it differs. I think your very first video will probably take you about 4 days to make, even if it's only 5 minutes of output, because there is so many different technical things going on. It's one of those kind of familiarization scenarios where the more you record, the faster it gets. It's definitely a lot more work than a classic lecture, for example. A good bit of thought goes in. I think, I don't want to speak for everyone, but for me to make 1 5-10 minute video can take a full day sometimes. It just really depends on the content and varies. As I said, if you're in a bit of a rhythm with them, you can kind of make about 2 or 3 videos, but it's more the thought and how you present them. And because we're trying to do kind of Khan Academy style tutorials, you're thinking about how to present a few things using the whiteboard and interactivity with slides as well. But they are quite time consuming, but I guess the good part is once you've made them, then you do have a good resource there, which can be utilised for a couple of years at least.
Yeah, so the person that commented that it's hard to hear, so we will try and either speak here at the camera or use the mic. So sorry, just to interrupt.
It was just a follow-up question about the light board. It looks very cool, but I just wondered if you've also tried just recording videos and writing on the Zoom whiteboard, and how, I mean, obviously the amount of time input to make those whiteboard videos and edit them compared to just instantaneously being able to record and write at the same time, like what are the advantages and is it worth the time effort? Like if somebody was starting from scratch, would it be worth setting up and building from scratch a whiteboard?
So I guess we do use the Zoom whiteboard for all of our live sessions and for some of our tutorial videos as well, especially when we could get into the building to use the big wacom that we had. I think for the lecture style videos, initially we liked the thought of having something that looked a bit more professional, and also you rather than just be the lecturer on a tiny screen in the corner, they're embedded within the whole video. And I think our preference was, because online learners, they don't get to meet you, you don't get that sense of that you know who you are as a lecturer. We felt as though those videos give more of a sense of you're almost in a lecture theatre. It's kind of that same experience, but you do have to, there are pros and cons. The big con being the time it takes. I know when Colette and I, we developed a new course together. Initially it took a long time to create, and we both had to be in the filming studio together, to one person filming and one person recording and editing. But over COVID, I was actually able to go on my own and do it on my own. So you get faster at it and you get better at it. And I do think, for me personally, I still prefer to do it that way, because I think the output is a lot nicer for students.